Yes, good afternoon. I want to welcome you to our September Lunch and Learn with the Salina Legal Women Voters. My name is Lori Troe, and I am president of the Salina Legal Women Voters. And I'm excited to get the fall semester started. We have September, October, and November. And I'll tell you a little more about those at the end. And we are here today to talk about One Salina with Greg Stevens, and then he is going to introduce our speaker, Bryce, to talk about immigration. So, Greg Stevens, I welcome you to the podium and enjoy.
Well, thank you for giving One Salina the opportunity to make a few comments. I'm kind of speaking for Julie Bertarda, who is kind of our leader, and I've got 4 or 5 slides, and then we're going to turn it over to Bryce and Galyna to talk. This work.
Is it right? Go.
Salina started as a welcoming group, and we started after one of the Talk Salina presentations that we had in the year 2019. And after that presentation, many in the group wanted to continue and focus on the topic of immigration. So we're committed to fostering cultural and ethnic inclusion. We found out that Salina had 54 different countries represented in the community, something like that. This is what the city of Salina told us. So our Facebook page is One Salina /Facebook. If you have a chance, take a look at that. It kind of keeps you up to date on some of the things we're doing. Some of the things that we have done in the past is the museums, events. We've had displays there, and here's one where we had different seeds that represented the different countries, and then kids and anybody that wanted to come by could kind of create these countries and put these different seeds out. The Land Institute helped us a lot with that. We've also done parades, Hispanic events at the temple. We promoted voting, and we did a video event at USD 305 here. And it was pretty well attended, had a discussion afterwards. So many thoughts I have regarding diversity and inclusion and immigration is some questions. Are we doing our part with diversity and inclusion in businesses, on community boards, in civic leadership? Are we doing our part in supporting refugees? And we do a lot of talking, but it's actions that have consequences. There's a slide here. I'm going to introduce Bryce here in a minute, but I have a couple statistics I wanted to share with everybody. Is the Center for Economic Development and Business Research in Wichita has come out with a study, and also the Kansas Health Foundation. And this is something that I'm sure all of you know, but it's just a good reminder. Immigration policies are slowing growth in Kansas. We are now 31st ranking in population in the United States, whereas We were 20th at one time, so our population is declining. Salina's population has declined over 2% since the year 2020, and the Center for Business, the Wichita Center, has a study out saying that we will become, as a state, a majority-minority state by the year 2066. That's not too far off. That's like 40-some years. It's our children's, grandchildren's lifetime. Why is this happening? 80% of the counties are losing population. They're losing population because of aging and because youth are moving out. They're moving to basically the southwest part of the United States, of Kansas, Garden, Liberal, Dodge, but also some of the counties in that territory. Liberal had a decline in population because one of their packing plants closed down, but the population will probably come back there. Garden had a decline at one time, and their population came back. Surprisingly, some of the counties on the western tier, the population over the last couple of years has not declined that much, believe it or not. Like Rawlins County has had a slight increase, Thomas County has had a slight increase, and then Wallace and some of Scott have also had increases. This is happening partially because people from Colorado are kind of moving back into that area. And more youth, because farm prices were quite good for a period of time. They've been declining lately, with the exception of cattle prices. Cattle prices are really, really high. But the grain prices are going down now. That has brought some youth back into the area. Not all of these youth are going into conventional farming. A lot of them are going into kind of specialty kinds of activities. They're really, really small producers, we can call them producers. So prior to, just a little story here, prior to my teaching out of K-State is I worked in agriculture, and I covered all the states in Kansas as well as outside of Kansas, a lot of the area. One thing I noticed was each county had a county seat and 2 or 3 feeder communities into that county seat. And a lot of these 80 counties that we're talking about where population is declining is we have those feeder communities have all disappeared. So now you have the county seats, and the county seats are starting to look now when I go back out into these areas like the areas that were once the feeder communities. And Salina happens to have a slight pull factor. We're pulling people in, but if you look at the territory around Salina, it comprises of a lot of aging population, and it's also in our market area as a regional shopping center. It's a territory that has most of these counties where population is declining. So we've got some challenges in the future, but we also have some opportunities because if we're going to become a majority-minority state, we really need to think about some of the opportunities, I think, that take place due to becoming more of a welcoming community. So I wonder, why don't we have, here's a thought, why don't we have a welcome week here where we're welcome and looking at ways. We got great people in Salina. We got great social services. We got great institutions. We got great organizations. Are we doing everything that we can do to showcase and create the kind of community where immigrants would want to come here? Because that's going to be our future. So we have an opportunity. We can start growing like Garden and Dodge if we do this in a purposeful way. So this is a subject that I've been really interested in for quite a while, and I want to turn it over now to a different subject, which is, are we doing our part in exploring ways to help with the refugee program in the country? So I'm going to introduce Bryce Fuhrmann and Galyna here that we'll talk with a little bit later on. Bryce.
All right, let me find my presentation here while I'm introducing myself. My name is Bryce Fuhrmann, and I'm the Community Sponsorship Coordinator at IRC in Wichita. It's the International Rescue Committee. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we do as an organization, because I'm guessing not everyone in the room is familiar with IRC. But then we'll also talk specifically about ways that you might be able to get involved with helping refugees. So here's just a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today. As I said, I'm going to talk about IRC and who we are, and I'm going to talk about the program specifics of our RNP program. That's reception and placement, and that's the program that we offer to all of our refugees. And I'm going to talk a little bit about who would actually receive some of those services, so that you have a good idea of who we serve as well. And then I'm going to highlight some of the things that we're doing here in Wichita. Well, not here. We're not in Wichita here. We're in Salina here. In Wichita, that can also be, you're within our service range up here in Salina. And so things that we're doing more locally here than what we're doing nationally. And then we're going to just offer you some ways that you might be able to get involved with refugees and what the next steps would be if you chose to do so. And then I will leave some time at the end for any questions that you have. So feel free to hold on to those questions until the end, or if it's something that you're going to forget, please feel free to stop me along the way and ask those questions. So just to start off about who IRC is, the International Rescue Committee is a global organization that was founded in 1933 at the behest of Albert Einstein. And if you think about what was going on in the world in 1933, we were on the cusp of World War II. Nazi ideology had taken over in Germany, and so there was a big need for the humanitarian causes of refugees at that time. And so Einstein put out a call for somebody to take up this cause, and that is when IRC was founded. We are now one of 10 resettlement agencies here in the U.S. All 10 of those agencies contract with the federal government, but we are not a government organization. And we offer the same list of resettlement services to all of our clients as each of those other resettlement agencies. IRC has 28 affiliate offices around the U.S. The closest one to you is the one in Wichita. And all of those offices are prepared and ready to welcome refugees into their community. As I mentioned, we do contract with the federal government through a program that they call the Reception and Placement Program, or the RNP program. And that program really has three key components. The first is to arrange for proper reception into the U.S. So we go to the airport, we welcome them, we make sure that they have a hot meal when they arrive that's also appropriate to their culture. But in addition to that, we provide refugees with basic necessities. So we make sure that they get housing, that they get access to public benefits that help them get their groceries, and that they get their furniture and their towels and their dishes when they move into their new house, so that they're welcomed, but they have those necessities to survive. And then the third piece is that we coordinate with all of the public benefits programs to make sure that they are able to be employed as quickly as possible so that they can achieve self-sufficiency. And really that is our goal with each and every client, that they become self-sufficient as quickly as possible. So in just a moment, we're going to watch a video that I forgot to test the sound on this TV when I walked in today, so I'm hoping the sound will work. But this video is going to talk a little bit about the difference between who a refugee is and what other migrants look like. And so we're just going to kind of see if this will work for us. All right. So refugees are the primary population that we serve at IRC. And again, those are people who are fleeing their homeland for fear of persecution for one of 5 reasons. Because of their race, their religion, their nationality, their political opinion, or their membership in a specific social group. And there are now, the video was a little old, so if you were paying attention to the number in there, it's now over 100 million refugees worldwide, is the latest estimate. And less than 1% of those refugees will be offered a chance at resettlement. And so it's this enormous worldwide need that we're just doing our part to put a small dent in that problem. And so these are people who are really struggling with their very basic needs, just looking for a way to survive and find a new place to be able to survive. But there are 2 other populations that we also serve that many people confuse with refugees because they're very subtle distinctions. The first is the special immigrant visa holders, or SIVs. And these are Iraqis and Afghans who worked with or on behalf of the U.S. government during the various wars in the Middle East. And because of their relationship with the U.S., they're granted special permission to come to the U.S. the same way that refugees do. They have all of the same benefits as refugees, but they don't have to go through all of the background screening process and the UN side of the refugee process. And then the third category are humanitarian parolees. And currently, these are primarily coming from Ukraine, but they are some special places in other places as well. And I have to say that I hate the name humanitarian parolee. Because what's the first thing that you think of when you hear the word parole? Prison, getting out of jail, criminal. These are not criminals. They're coming here legally. They have a valid reason for entering. They can get authorized from the U.S. government. But the parole status is essentially a designation that they do not have an indefinite time to stay in America. Like a parolee coming out of prison, they have that window where they're kind of being watched and made sure that they're doing things that are right in society. This group comes with a 2-year window that they can be a part of the U.S. society, at which point they would have to file for either a new status or return home. And so hopefully they can figure out something in that 2-year status window that they can have a more long-range goal of where they want to be. All right, so I mentioned that we provide the reception and placement, or R&P program. And here is a graphic that just kind of shows what all is involved with that. And if you think about what it might take for you to pick up and move halfway around the world, you would need a lot of things, right? You would need a way to find some shelter. You would need food. You would need to find employment. You would possibly need to learn a language depending on where you're going. If you had children, you would need to get them enrolled in school. Those are all things that are part of the reception and placement program. And they're services that we provide to each and every one of our clients. And some of them are very quick and easy. It does not take a whole lot of effort to go to the airport and pick up a family at the airport and take them to wherever they're staying that night. But it does take a lot of time to help them find employment and help with job applications and interviewing processes. And it takes a lot of time for the cultural orientation to help orient them to our way of life here in America and what that might look like. So some of these services are done very rapidly, and some of them take a lot more time, but there are things that are necessary for all of our families to both feel welcomed and secure here in the U.S. and to get their life started here. So what does this look like in our area, in Wichita, or for you in Salina? We do have a 100-mile radius, so Salina just barely fits into our radius of our service area from Wichita. And in fiscal year 2022, we had 739 individuals that resettled into the Wichita area. Now, in that year, all 739 of them were resettled in Wichita proper. And part of that is because most of our outlying areas don't have access to public transportation. And so we have to make sure that they're able to get around to where they need to go. And so that's one of our key things. Now our community sponsorship program, which is brand new in the Wichita office, gives us the opportunity to really expand out into some of those other areas where that's not as big of an issue. So currently we are seeing quite a few refugees coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as both Sudan and South Sudan. And those are probably our two largest refugee populations coming in currently. But we're also seeing quite a few Ukrainian humanitarian parolees still coming to the U.S. as well. And on top of all of our services that we're required to provide for that R&D program, we like to make sure that our families really feel at home in their new community. So we have special things like our World Refugee Day event over the summer. This currently is Immigrant Welcoming Week, and so we had a bazaar on Friday night to help make sure they feel welcome. We do women's empowerment market. There's a lot of different things that we do that are beyond just the requirements to help make sure that our families feel at home. And here's just a graphic of some of the populations that we served most in fiscal year 2022. You can see that in that year we had a huge Afghani population come in. 480 of our people came from Afghanistan. But we also had a lot from the Democratic Republic of Congo that year at 144. And then Sudan and Syria were our other two big ones with 47 and 55 people. But you can see that we really have people that can come from anywhere around the world. Just wherever that need is in the world, we'll make sure to accept refugees from those territories and countries as well. So what are some ways that you can get involved? Well, the first and perhaps the easiest way from in Salina would be to donate. We love our donors. We love anyone who's going to give financial contributions because our clients really depend on those contributions. But we also accept in-kind donations. So we do bedding and towels and pots and pans and anything that you might need to set up a house. We welcome any of those donations as well. It might be a little harder for you in Salina to be a volunteer because it's a long drive to Wichita from here for a volunteer event. But if you know people in Wichita that would like to volunteer, we have great options for them. From helping to set up the house, to providing transportation for medical appointments, to doing our child watch while our clients are in their English lessons. Pretty much if you can think of a volunteer need, we probably have that at our office. And the last one, which is really the area that I focus on, is co-sponsorship, which is really a model where you take all of what we do in the IRC office and community groups can become involved and really host or sponsor a family with our help. And so I'm going to really dive into that one here for a little bit. It is pretty new to IRC. The first offices started in 2021 with co-sponsorship, but some of our offices still don't even have a program. 22 out of our, it's actually 28 offices, this slide needs updated. 22 out of our 28 offices now have a community sponsorship program, but it is brand new in Wichita. We started this program when I was hired in January, and we are just now having our first families being sponsored. We have a family that's coming in on Thursday and one on Tuesday next week. That'll be our first 2 sponsored families. So we're pretty excited about that. But it also means that there's a lot of moving pieces as we try and kind of understand what this looks like in our context here in Wichita. But here are some of the guidelines of what community sponsorship looks like. First, you are paired with a family that you're going to be walking through their initial resettlement process with. And so we asked each of those community sponsor groups to provide a financial contribution of $5,000 that goes toward that family specifically. Now, that $5,000 can include a minimum of $3,500 in cash assistance that will go directly toward their rent and utilities, and then the other $1,500 can be done through those in-kind donations, but it can be all cash as well. And these community groups can take on many, many forms. It can be a church group, a Sunday school, it could be a League of Women's Voters or another civic organization, but it could also be your home book club. It doesn't have to be an official organization that's co-sponsoring. It could be any group that's already formed. But we do ask that the group be comprised of 6 to 10 core members because that gives you the ability to spread out the work enough that not one person is feeling overwhelmed by this burden, but it's also not such a large group that the family that you're sponsoring is overwhelmed by having to meet 50 people and try and figure out who's doing what. And so we ask that those 6 to 10 people commit to a 6-month commitment to helping meet this family from arrival through their first 6 months here in the U.S. And this is just a graphic that kind of shows some of what the group's responsibilities are that I just outlined. But we also have our responsibility on IRC side for each of these groups. We're not just going to give you a family and leave you hanging. So we're going to provide things like background checks. We do trainings with all of our co-sponsor teams. We have a co-sponsor agreement that will outline what services you're providing and what services IRC is providing, because we're not asking you to take on every one of those core services. And we'll provide monitoring and oversight. We'll do a weekly check-in with the group to kind of see what that group needs, what challenges they're facing, but also to kind of guide them and say, okay, we have a deadline coming up this week for applying for benefits. What do we need to do to make that happen? Or this week is the week that we have to have them enrolled in school. If that's something that your group is taking on, what do you need to make sure they're enrolled in school? But it also gives you a chance to report back to me all of the things that you have been doing, because we do have to maintain case files for our contracts with the government. And so we don't expect our community sponsor groups to know all of the ins and outs of case filing, but just reporting back to me so that I can include what needs to be said in those case file documentations. And just a next steps, if you're interested, the first one would be to set up a one-on-one meeting with me to receive an application for your co-sponsor group. And that's an application that looks like you have to have everything figured out at that point, but it's really a guide to just make you start thinking about some of the things that your group will need to take on throughout the co-sponsorship period. The next thing would be then to review that application with me, and then we do our training process, which is fairly extensive. It's a 2-part, 2.5-hour each time training, and that'll go through all of the nuts and bolts of what your group will be doing, but it will also give you some of the history of refugees and the process that they go through coming to America, and it will also include things like how do we deal with the potential trauma that your family has been facing and what it means to be going through trauma-informed care through this process. So it's quite all-encompassing in that training. And then we do volunteer background checks on each and every member of your core team, because the safety and security of our clients is the utmost priority for IRC. And then we have a document that says we are certifying that we're ready, that we've gone through the training, we've done all of the fundraising that we need to do. Our team is ready to be sponsored with a family, at which point we would go through a matching process and connect you with an incoming family that we have. And there is a chance at that point that the family has a need that your group is not prepared to handle. So if we match you with a family and they have an autistic child, and your group is not prepared to take that on, you can decline that match. You have a 48-hour window to either accept or decline the family. And then we go through our co-sponsorship agreement, which outlines all of the things that your group would be handling and all of the things that IRC would be handling, as well as doing some of our liability paperwork for confidentiality purposes, for vehicle use purposes, so that everyone on the team is on board with that. And then we have the check-in process throughout the co-sponsorship period. Now, I'm going to add one thing that I don't have on the slides here, because Greg asked me to talk a little bit about Welcome Corps, because that's something that you may have heard of on the news if you're plugged in. Welcome Corps is essentially doing all of the same co-sponsorship stuff in a private forum. So instead of working with IRC, you would apply online to be a a private sponsor, and they have a fee associated with that. I don't know off the top of my head what that fee is. I wasn't prepared for that when I came today. But I think it's like $2,200 per person in the family. And you don't get essentially all of the training and the oversight that IRC would provide with that. You would be doing that as a group on your own. And you would have the support of they call it a private sponsor team, which is an organization that does some of that oversight. They just won't work as closely with your team as IRC does on the co-sponsorship model. In addition to that, as a private sponsorship model, there's also an opportunity to support Ukrainians coming in, because they have to have a private sponsor to come in. And that's through a separate program, and I can get you a website for that if that's something that you are interested in. But Galyna is going to share a little bit about the Ukrainian part, because Galyna's from Ukraine, and so we love her expertise on that.
Hi. Yes, I'm Ukrainian, and I work as a community engagement coordinator for the IRC-Wichita Development Department. And the part which Bryce wanted me to share with you guys, you need to ask me before the questions what you would like me to share with you. But because of my Ukrainian background, and I'm Ukrainian, and because of the whole Ukrainian situation, we start to receive Ukrainian refugees in 2020 when the war started with Russia. And right now in Wichita area we have more than 60 people who already resettled, but all of them, like 60 Ukrainian people who already resettled, but all of them came through the private sponsorship. And private sponsorship, there is a few different ways how you can fill up it and become a sponsor for the Ukrainian family, but the easy one is go to the USCIS website. It's a government website, and you can, but for that purpose you need to know the family which you are sponsoring. So you need to be connected with the family which you are which you would like to sponsor. In this case, you don't need to pay any fees through USCIS. There is other options like you Bryce mentioned, like Welcome Ukraine, where you need to pay a fee and where you will be matched with the family. But in that case, it's a different story. In this case, when you are sponsored for the Ukrainian family and the family already arrived, IRC has this opportunity to support you, like financially and informationally, but the family needs to be in the United States. In cases the other nationality, like from other countries, they start to receive their service before even arrival in the United States. So this is the difference between the Ukrainian population and the other refugee from the other part of the world. And yes, you did have a question.
My question was going to be, can we get her a microphone?
I don't even know if there is a microphone here.
She speaks English fine, but okay. The voice doesn't carry. I'm sorry.
Other questions?
Yes.
How did you end up here?
In the United States or in IRC? In the United States, my husband is military, U.S. military. He serves for the Air Force. So, yeah, this is how, and Wichita has an Air Force base, McConnell. So I'm a military spouse. And I didn't know about IRC until the war started in my country. That's how I ended up working with the refugees. Because I was trying to help my nations, and I started to help all others. Any other questions? Yes.
So, if you don't mind me asking, is there an expectation of Ukrainian families resettling here in Salina County or surrounding counties? I heard in Hutchinson, a family had moved or, was recently welcomed there. So is that something that's soon to be seen here?
I don't know that I would say there's an expectation so much as a hope that, yes, we would expand to Salina or to other communities. And yeah, you mentioned the group in Hutch. It's actually going to be several groups in Hutch that are forming co-sponsorship teams. And they're going to be welcoming refugees from all over the world.
Are you talking about, specifically about Ukrainians or about all of them?
All of them.
If talking about all of them, it's up to you guys. You can choose and you can become a sponsoring group, and it's like Bryce when like show you all process. It just needs to be your desire to do that. You just need to decide. And the citation, agriculture citation, yes, it's a great way to improve like the working power, manpower in this area when you became a responsible group. No question? Yes.
Well, my question's for Bryce, actually. It's clear that there's some donations, but I'm assuming there's also federal government money.
Yeah, so on top of the $5,000 that we asked for the co-sponsored group, the refugees have a one-time $1,075 per person contribution that's called their R&P funds. That goes along with this program, but then they also have access to several different public benefits programs like SNAP or food stamps, and TANF, which is the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. But there's also some programs that are specifically designed for refugees that you might not be as familiar with as those. So we have Matching Grant, which is an employment program that helps fund some of their initial costs for their rent and utilities while finding employment. And we have Refugee Cash Assistance, which is just a pocket money program specifically designed for refugees.
This is something I've thought about and done a little research on online because
Okay.
I'm interested in it. But one of the things that seems like maybe the biggest hurdle is the language. And that, I mean, Salina has lots of job openings right now for good jobs, and they need people, but it seems like if you were sponsoring a family, you need to have people that could match up with language needs and translation needs and that.
Yes and no. So we do have lots of people in our office that speak lots of different languages, and I love that about our office, but we have some languages that aren't spoken in our office that we have refugees settling from. And so we have to deal with it much in the same way a co-sponsor group would if they don't have that language, and that's through phone interpreters, or if it's not a high priority conversation, so say you're having dinner with your family and you want to talk to them, that's not something that we would pay for the language line service for, but it's something that we have recommended apps that are free apps on your phone that do translation. One of those that we recommend for our co-sponsor teams has an option for a live phone interpreter, but it's all volunteer based, and so we can't verify if they have availability when we would necessarily need that translation option. But we would make sure that things like budget conversation, talk about health insurance and things like that are all done with a live interpreter over the phone if it's not somebody that we have in the office.
And especially in the hospitals, in the clinics, they have their own language lines. They have the clinics paid for the interpretation.
As does school districts.
Yeah.
They all have, that's a requirement of both health employers and schools.
Two things. I have a cousin who lives in Wichita, and he's probably in his 50s, and he and his wife are teaching English to a refugee family through a church program they're involved in. So that was my first question. Churches, how many churches have gotten involved? And secondly, how did you start the program in Hutchinson? Who reached out to you first? Was it churches? Was it just a family in the community? You know, how did that community get started?
Yeah, we have a number of churches that are involved, some of them through volunteering rather than co-sponsorship, some of them that do donations, some that hold donation drives, a lot of different church groups that are somehow related to IRC. One that is specifically doing a co-sponsorship team that is still in their process of onboarding. So yeah, lots of churches. The group in Hutchinson was actually, there was someone in the community that kept going to essentially a headhunter for businesses and saying, we need workforce, who do you have for us? And they didn't have the employees or the potential employees. And so she started thinking about communities like Garden and Dodge that have all these immigrant populations and wondered how they attracted those populations into their community. And she contacted the IRC office and then was able to apply for a grant through the city of Hutchinson that would be enough to sponsor 10 refugee families. And so that's kind of where that group was founded from. And then many of the groups that are then forming the teams are out of churches in the Hutchinson area.
So again, one of the sponsoring organizations could have volunteers with, and I mean, he's an engineer and she is a former college professor.
His name Mike? Mike is that? Your cousin, he's a Mike.
Mike.
He's actually the teacher for the Ukrainian family who are my closest friends, and they came throughout Manchester.
Small world.
Yeah.
But anyway, it just really struck me when he told me they were doing that. You know, their oldest daughter's at KU, they're empty nesters, and I thought, wow, you know, what, and they're just, you know, getting so much out of it.
When he spoke of churches, in like Salina or wherever, several churches work together.
They could. It really depends on the church and how they wanted to structure it. One of the issues with a church as a whole doing this is that size of the group is 6 to 10 recommended. And so like the whole church wouldn't necessarily be serving on that core team, but they could help with donations and setting up the house where they're not necessarily with the family. Or you could have a team of like drivers that could take turns doing some of that transportation work. But some of the smaller churches could work together with other churches as well, or even larger churches that just don't have enough interest to really form a team on their own. Yeah.
And I'm understanding that a lot of this has work-related issues, that Salina needs workers. Is when you come in here as an immigrant or a person that's a refugee, is there training programs that are connected, like say Tony's needs welders or somebody needs something or other that you can hook? I mean, they may not automatically fit into the work need that's in the community.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They may or may not have the skills necessary for the work that's available. Like I mentioned, the matching grant program, that program has an option where they can pay for some of those education pieces, but it has limits on the funding, so I don't know if a welding class would be more expensive than what is required, but some of them do have training programs as part of that. Excuse me. But we also work with various workforce centers and have an economic empowerment team that kind of helps with some of those employment
in the right place.
Yeah.
I'm coming from the lens of healthcare. So your refugees that come in, and like on the one slide it said within 7 days or 7 days seeing a healthcare provider. Do you have preferred healthcare providers that you then connect those individuals with, or like we are a federally qualified healthcare center, so we are appropriate regardless of ability to pay, like being able to help with healthcare in this area if we have people with that need, just knowing how can we get involved as a healthcare facility to help with that population.
Okay.
Because I would say that we have our main contractor right now in Wichita, talking about Wichita Youth Salina, and we have right now refugees, so it's hard actually. For you guys to start, you need to have a co-sponsoring group. You cannot just send in family and without co-sponsoring group to Salina. So it must be formed co-sponsoring group. There is no other chances as much as from my expertise, I don't see the good way for you to have those resettlement if it's not in the co-sponsoring program. However, like right now we have the main health contractor, it's a health score. So within 7 days, even the people from Hutchinson, they need to be seen at the health score in Wichita. And then the health score, after this first intake, can refer them to the local health department, like in Hutchinson or in Cleveland, whatever they are doing.
And I would love to have that initial health appointment be able to be done at more locations, but the Kansas State Office for Refugees has to approve the local health provider for that initial health assessment. And so if we can convince them to approve a more local option, we would love to do that. But if they don't, only that initial appointment needs to be done at Health Board of Wichita. And then whoever locally can be, your normal everyday provider.
What kind of criteria does the healthcare provider have to have before they can leave the approved?
I don't know that there's a criteria so much as it needs to be a willingness from the Kansas State Office for Refugees to come in and just do the approval process. There's nothing particularly unique about those services that they're providing that other offices couldn't do them. They're just not approved to do them.
And they need to work with Medicare.
They do need to work with Medicare, but that's fairly common in health providers.
My experience with this is back in the 80s when I lived in Concordia and Guatemalan refugees came in. The Sisters of St. Joseph were instrumental in getting out of Illinois. And one time there were probably at least 10 families, and I don't know how many people living in Concordia. And so I would just say it's a very rewarding thing on our part to have this kind of interaction. It's just, almost brings tears to my eyes to think about that. There were several Guatemalan grandmas that actually got buried in Concordia and then eventually they all pretty much moved on, except for one family who was working at Tony's at night and driving back and forth from Concordia all those years with small children. They've stayed here. They're part of this Salina community. Everybody else has moved on to where there are more Guatemalan families, which is part of my question. Hutchinson is sponsoring 10 families. Is that ideal? I mean, you probably would like to have more than one Ukrainian family in our town, right? I mean, is it nice to have some?
Yeah, it's certainly helpful for our families to have a community that understands their language and their culture. But it's also, if they have a lot of the same culture, it makes it harder for them to develop relationships and learn English and have a new community as well.
People who has actually more like less community connection, but more like less their own community connection. They are more self-sufficient and they are more like with the Mike, for example. Yes, Mike speaks Russian, but also he's American, and the family has a chance to be involved in the community of like United States community, the American community, instead of just being like close to me and talking just to me.
So yeah, there's benefit, but there's also challenges involved with that.
And then my other experience with this is reading Mary Pfeiffer's book called Middle of Everywhere, and she lives in Lincoln, Nebraska, and they have a huge, big refugee organization. I don't know if it's IRC or not, but they bring in lots of refugees up there and have lots of job opportunities for them. So I recommend that book. It's a little bit old now, but every chapter is about a different family that has moved in to Lincoln. And then of the 10 families in Hutchinson, does each family have 6 to 10 volunteers? Yes. Okay, that's what I was thinking. So,
Do you try to pull in, this just came to my mind, the question, owners of business that need employees?
It's helpful to have those contacts, absolutely, even if they're on the team. But it's not necessary.
Not necessary, but do you have some of those on the team?
Sometimes. In Hutch, we have a couple of those, yeah.
And actually, you cannot predict it. It's like a cows. You cannot predict it just because when the people already know that there is a family of refugee coming, they start to propose their job by themselves. Like, you don't need to really search for that, like, so be so worried about the job. Because job places exist.
So I was told we needed to be out of the room by 1, and it's now 1:05. I'm happy to continue answering questions, but if we do need to relinquish this space, I want to honor that, and I also want to honor your time as well. So thank you for having us to come and present, and I would love to have more conversations after. If you are interested at all, I have both QR codes to get to the IRC volunteer page, and I have my business cards in here, so feel free to take one with you.
I want to thank Greg and Bryce, and I didn't catch your name, for coming and speaking. This was very informational. And I want to thank all of you for coming. And I want to tell about a few upcoming dates we have. Next Monday night is our Fall Issues Forum at 7 p.m. It's going to be over at the McKenzie 2 room. And it will be our new police chief, CJ Wise. He will be speaking. And again, that's next Monday at 7 p.m. And then on October the 10th will be our next Lunch and Learn here. And it will be there will be somebody from the library speaking on banned books, because October is banned books month. And then on Sunday, October the 15th, we will be having a candidate forum, and we are calling it Speed Dating with the Candidates. Each candidate will be seated at a table with different people, and they have 10 minutes to ask questions, and then the candidates will move to the next table, and they'll be able to do an opening statement and a closing statement. And it will be Sunday, September the 15th, from 3 to 6 at Sunrise Presbyterian Church. October, sorry. My months are running together. So, anyway, I think
Could we have a sign-up sheet for anybody here who is interested in this? So we have some way to contact each other, or get
yeah,
things started?
and also I have the sign-up sheet for everybody that was here. You can make sure you sign the sheet of paper, and then I'll put another sheet of paper for people that are interested.
Take a check or something to
Yeah.
sign our sign-up slip or something.
And we also have Lunch and Learn in November, the first Tuesday in November here. It's an update on the river.
Yes, Jamie and Mr. Liberty here. November the 14th.
Okay, thank you.
So, again, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.